Thank you, Jamie. I love that song. I love your music. Very comforting. It's going to be okay. What a message. What a message. So, we were only 7 years old. And here we were, my best friend Randy Wright and I, coming from St. Clair's after school. It was 3:30. We were on a tight deadline because my mom knew what time it was and she knew how long it took us to get home from school. But on this day, my best friend Randy Wright had a good idea. Now, you know what the problem is with good ideas? Sometimes they're insanity. And the problem with insanity is that it doesn't tell you it's insanity. It tells you it's a good idea. So when Randy said, hey, we should stop and get some bottles and make some money, and then we can go buy candy, I thought it was a great idea. We certainly had time. So we went off hustling bottles. We got enough bottles to make, we were millionaires. We had almost 50 cents. We were rich. We went to the candy store over on 63rd Street, and then we were standing there looking at all the stuff, and then he decides to buy baseball cards. Because the baseball cards, they have bubble gum in them, and then they got these tattoos. Oh, yeah. So we got 4 or 5 packs of these things each. We were rich. We were rich. It only cost a nickel. So we decided to chew the gum up, and then we're going to make the biggest bubble gum wad in the world. So we're chewing up all the gum, and then we got on these tattoos, and we're figuring, what are we going to do with the tattoos? So we started sticking them on our hands, and then we put one on our head, and we put one on the side. We just went crazy, lost our minds. Now, the backstory to this is that my aunt, who helped my mother raise me, she was one of my primary caregivers. And in those days, families, we had extended families. And so my mother, being a young woman, needed that help. And so my aunt stepped in and helped to raise me. And my aunt had very clear principles. She was from the South. And she told me in no uncertain terms, she said, boy, don't you never let me catch you with no tattoos on you, because that's common, that's low. She had told me this in no uncertain terms on many occasions. Well, I had an excuse because I had lost my mind. I forgot. So while we're having fun, we're making the tattoos, all of a sudden it occurs to me, uh-oh, it's after 4 o'clock. I'm late from school. We gotta go. So we dash off, we forget everything that we're doing, we rush home. I run into the house and I'm thinking what kind of story can I come up with? Because we're late. We're late and I gotta have a good story. So I walk in the door. While I'm concocting this story, I've always had a fairly good imagination. And the first thing she says, as she looks at me with this shock on her face, and I'm trying to figure out, why is she looking at me like that? She says, boy, where did you get that mess on your face? And I'm thinking, what mess? Didn't I tell you about those tattoos? And then it hit me. Uh-oh. I got tattoos all over my face, over my arms. I got to come up with a quick one because I'm getting ready to get it. In those days, they had these things that they call whippings. I don't know if they do that anymore, but they used to whip you. And I used to get a lot of whippings because I just happened to be a bad little rascal. So while she's figuring out, what to whip me with, I said, but wait, Mama, wait. I didn't do it. And she says, what do you mean you didn't do it? Who did it? Oh, it was the man. The man. She said, what man? The man down in the basement. What basement? He grabbed me and Randy, and then he put these tattoos all over us. I didn't do it. And she went ballistic. And my auntie, when she got upset, the first thing she did is call on the name of the Lord, right? She said, Jesus, oh Lord, somebody hurt my baby. And she gets on the phone before I can modify that story. She gets on the phone and she's calling everybody in the world. She calls my mother, and then my mother was dating a vice cop. She comes over and she's with this guy in the suit, and then these other guys come with these big black cars and they got suits. It was just horrendous. And I'm thinking as this story is unfolding, how am I going to get out of this? Well, they take us over to Randy's house, and I have to tell Randy, Randy, you remember the man, right? And Randy's like, yeah, I remember. We get in the car, we go back to the scene of the crime, and we're wandering down through the alley, and we find the little alley where it happened, and then I find this door down in the basement, because in those days, they used to have people who lived in the basement, they shovel coal, keep the building hot. It's like the superintendent, that kind of thing. So I figured, well, it's worth saying, yeah, he was down in there. So I pointed to a door and said, yeah, this is where he was. They knocked on the door, and lo and behold, the door opens up, and here was this man. Terrified, because he's more cops than he ever seen in his life. And they got the suits on. These guys were serious business. So they take this poor guy and they're like handcuffing him and like, uh-oh. And then in that moment, I shifted beyond the fear. Because sometimes fear can make you stick to a story even when you know it's not true. You'll stick to it. I will stick to it because of the fear. But in that moment, I moved back to my authentic self. My heart opened, and I began to experience compassion. Actually, what I really thought was that this man was going to get the electric chair, and it was going to be my fault. But I moved into that place where my heart opened, and I knew that I could not allow this man to be hurt, to keep me from getting my whipping, that I needed to face whatever it was. It just is what it is. That's all it is. And in that moment, I guess my mother must have had the same sense, of awareness, because she's told my aunt, she said, wait a minute, Aunt Lou, wait a minute. She said, I know Michael. Michael's got a good imagination. She said, let me talk to him. And she said, baby, come on now. You can tell Mommy the truth. What happened? And I let it go. Oh, Mama, I didn't mean to do it. I did it. Please don't put the man in an electric chair. And I finally confessed up. I let up. And all the time when I think about that lesson that I learned, all the time it was only fear. It was fear telling me something that wasn't true, telling me that I could not face the truth of those circumstances. And the moment that I surrendered, I felt the loving presence of my mom, of my aunt, and it was like everybody just kind of laughed about it. They thought it was, I got on punishment, of course, but I didn't even get a whipping. There was just this loving acceptance that, boys will be boys, and you know how Michael is. He'll make up a story on a moment's notice. And that story came to me this week during some experiences of the dark night of the soul. Many of you know that my mom transitioned in February, and I've never known what it's been like to be without my mom. She is just a light in my life. So much fun, so alive. I can still feel her presence, but I miss her. And that story came to me, and it was as if I could feel her presence. And then I heard a voice say, you are not alone. No matter how you feel, you are not alone. And I knew that that would be the topic of the talk today, because you, like me, may be experiencing some feelings like that. Maybe you're going through your own dark night, and I'm here to share with you that you are never alone, that there is a power and a presence within you that brings comfort, that brings peace, but it requires us to surrender to it. And so I have a scripture today to share with you. It's from the Gospels of Thomas. Jesus said, the master teacher, he who seeks, let him not cease seeking until he finds. And when he finds, he will be troubled. And when he is troubled, he will be amazed, and he will reign over the all. So no matter what the dark night that we're experiencing, whether it be grief, experiencing a transition of some sort in our life, seeking guidance on our new life work, working through a diagnosis we may have received, we might be feeling alone on the journey. And these issues, they bring with them both a blessing and a curse. A curse because they disturb our peace, as Jesus said, and a blessing because they disturb our peace. It's important that we be disturbed enough to reach out, to cry out, to ask this presence to reveal itself. You see, until we begin the process of spiritual awakening to our true self, we believe that we are victim to these issues. This reminds me of the cry of Job in the Hebrew scripture. In chapter 3, verse 25, perfectly illustrates this state of consciousness. We find ourselves in this deep suffering. Job says, "For the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me, and that which I was afraid of has befallen me." Fear, or if you like acronyms, false evidence appearing real, face everything and recover. It's a powerful creative force. And think about it. When it's amplified by the minds of millions, even billions of people on the planet, the thought form of fear becomes what looks like a reality. As I've mentioned in my talks in the past, in metaphysical science, we view the scriptures as a psychological journey through the consciousness of man. And towards that end, there's a wonderful reference book. It's called The Dictionary of Scripture and Myth. It's by G.S. Gaskell, and it provides some very interesting perspectives on the books in the Bible, the characters, the scenarios that are described. About the book of Job, Gaskell writes that Job is the symbol of the incarnate self. And this story of Job tells us of the soul's journey, which abandons its spiritual wealth on the higher planes and descends to incarnate on the lower planes. So we are more than what we know. We are much more than what we remember. He continues that having undergone the strife and suffering of life on the human plane, the soul puts off the garments of imperfection and rises to a more glorious state than before on the higher planes of our journey. He goes on to say that this third chapter of Job in particular is described when the self is beginning to operate in the human mind through the lowest thoughts of cunning, of fear, anger, etc., which have in them elements of truth and justice. The self is said to curse the day in which it must live in opposites, and it looks forward to the time when the evil conditions into which he was born shall vanish. He longs for the death of the lower instincts and the desires. In short, the suffering that is brought on by our fears and that resultant darkness in our life, it really serves to awaken the desire for our true nature to emerge. In Nichiren Buddhism, there is a concept that teaches earthly desires are enlightenment. And through that concept, we are taught how to create the greatest possible value from our desires and suffering, while neither denying them nor abandoning ourselves to them. This Buddhist principle thus offers us a new approach to the problem of human desire, one that is neither self-denying nor hedonistic or pleasure-seeking. Viewed from the standpoint of delusion, desire does not equal enlightenment. Because when we are stuck in our stuff, it then becomes a cause for suffering. But when it's viewed from the standpoint of enlightenment itself, earthly desires are indeed enlightenment. This is because a Buddha experiences desires while maintaining full control over them, always bringing forth their enlightened quality to the fullest benefit of self and others. And concurring with this point, in the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu scripture, it says, "He who is able to withdraw his senses from the objects of the senses, to refrain from receiving any impression from the objects, and focuses himself within the true self, such a one indeed is well established in the light of wisdom." As the rivers flowing into the ocean do not disturb the ocean, similarly, an awakened one enjoys life, but his enjoyment does not disturb his equilibrium. Such is not the case of one who is the victim of his own desires. And what these teachings impart is that as we pursue our desires and we obtain them, we realize their emptiness. They are simply teachers for us. The burden of fear will make a pauper out of a millionaire who is afraid of losing his wealth. In contrast, the release of this fear reveals the spirit of true abundance, allowing us to give, to tithe, to serve without thought of fear and lack and limitation. And this, in my opinion, is the path to true enlightenment. So the key is to remember who we really are while we're in the midst of our struggles, and to see our suffering as a guide to what we really desire in our life, which is to be free from suffering. And that is the nature of the Buddha, the awakened one, the Christ consciousness, the Atman. You know, I'm reminded of this story about these three salesmen who were sitting together, as some men are wont to do, sharing about how they had given their new wives duties. So Terry, he said that he married a woman from Canada. He told his fellows, he said, yep, on the first day, I told my wife that she was going to do all the dishes and the house cleaning, everything that needed done at my house. It took a couple of days, but I came home to a clean house, and the dishes were all washed and put away. Well, Jimmy said he got to top this. He said, well, I married a woman from Australia. I laid down the law to her. I gave her orders that she was to do all the cleaning, all the dishes, the cooking. On the first day, I didn't see any results. But the next day, it was better. And by the third day, man, my house was clean, the dishes were done, and I had a huge dinner on the table. Well, the third man said, well, I married an American girl. He boasted, from day one, I told her that her duties were to keep the house clean, the dishes washed, the lawn mowed, the laundry washed, hot meals on the table for every meal. He continued, well, on the first day, I didn't see anything. The second day, I didn't see anything. But by the third day, most of the swelling had gone down, and I could begin to see a little bit out of my left eye. Enough to fix myself a bite to eat, load the dishwasher, and call a landscaper. Often what we desire can bring unexpected results. They can, in fact, create problems for us. So what are these problems that we're creating in race consciousness with our minds? Webster defined a problem as something that is difficult to deal with, something that is a source of trouble, worry, difficulty in understanding something, a feeling of not liking or not wanting to do something. And when we look at the world, we can see plenty of examples that are a source of trouble or worry, things that we just do not like. Now, there are two basic types of problems, known and unknown. The known include those that require some action. We know that there's something that we need to do. Those that require additional expertise. Maybe we realize that we're not fully equipped to handle this on our own. Maybe we need a practitioner or a minister or a spiritual advisor or a sponsor, somebody to help us to walk through the situation. And then thirdly, there are those that require creative approaches. They say that if you keep doing what you've always done, you're going to keep on getting what you always got. So maybe a creative approach is required for that type of problem. And the unknown problem includes those that need to be identified. Sometimes we find ourselves in a space where we don't know, and we don't even know that we don't know. Not only that we have a problem, but that we don't have a clue as to how to resolve it. Sometimes we find ourselves in denial, that acronym that says, don't even know I am lying. And sometimes we lie because of the fear of facing the truth. It is what it is. That's all it is. And that acceptance can allow us to take the first step towards healing. We could further classify problems down into the area of balance. Sometimes we get too far into our heads and not enough centered in our hearts. And we find ourselves in the prison of our thoughts. Thoughts that we continue to think and that crystallize themselves into beliefs from which we cannot escape, from which we will not allow ourselves to escape. A belief, a thought that we continue to think. A thought that we continue to think. Other problems can center around our judgments. A judgment that something is wrong and we know what would make it right. Some might say, well, you got to judge because some things are just plain wrong. I mean, look at that dress on her. That's wrong. Look at them shoes. That's wrong. But there's a difference between judgment and discernment. Discernment is defined as the ability to see and understand people, things, and situations clearly and intelligently. An example might be is that I discern that your tie is different than my tie. I have no problem with that, Will. I accept your right to choose differently. Discernments can be healthy. Judgment, on the other hand, contains an emotional charge and an opinion that something is wrong. You got on a tie different from me? That's just wrong. Everybody knows people wear that kind of tie as insert whatever their judgment is. And of course, judgment is a way of life for many people. And judgment creates problems because it creates upset in the mind and in the heart. And when we judge something as wrong, we are creating problems for ourselves because we're setting ourselves up to be judge, jury, and executioner. And in the final analysis, we judge others. Why? Because we judge ourselves. You know, the old folks used to say, yeah, when you point a finger at somebody, you got 3 fingers pointing right back at you. That was a point of wisdom. And that self-judgment, it adds fuel to our fire of suffering. How many times do we struggle with an issue only to find ourselves hearing from within that still small voice that says, just let go and let God have it, reminding us that the cure for judgment is acceptance, just allowing it to be whatever it is, just letting go and letting God. In Psalms 56, chapter 3, verse 3, it is written, when I am afraid, I will trust you, reminding us of the power of surrender. And I love this wonderful, evocative poem that I first heard in the 12-step rooms many years ago. It's called Broken Toys, and it goes like this. As children bring their broken toys with tears for us to mend, I brought my broken dreams to God because he was my friend. But then, instead of leaving him in peace to work alone, I hung around and tried to help with ways that were my own. At last, I snatched them back and cried, how can you be so slow? My child, he said, what could I do? You never did let go. Someone once said that if you really want to learn how to let go, you just hold on long enough and soon you will be eager to let it go. It's like the Buddha saying that resentment is like grabbing a hot rock and getting ready to throw it at someone. But in the meantime, you are the one who gets burned. Holding on is like kissing a gorilla. You ain't done until the gorilla is done. And when it hurts enough, ultimately we will stop and we will say, please, please help me. Some believe that the pain of holding on must outweigh the pain of letting go. And I don't subscribe to that. I don't subscribe to that method of letting go. Although when there are those in my surroundings that are having that experience, I know to allow them the dignity of their process. I know that the same power and presence that's working with me, moving me through my process, is working with them too. For when truth is known anywhere, it's known everywhere. And Yogi Berra, the baseball great, said it clearly once. He said, "It ain't over until it's over." And we are the ones who choose when it's over. So what is it that we can do to heal ourselves of fear, to heal ourselves of these problems, and to move forward with our spiritual evolution? The Apostle John gives a clue to our freedom from bondage in John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. He writes, "The Word was in the beginning, and that very Word was with God, and God was that Word. The same was in the beginning with God. Everything came to be by his hand, and without him, not even one thing that was created came to be. The life in him, and the life is the light of men. And the same light shines in darkness, and the darkness does not overwhelm it." And this passage reminds us of some of the key facts that we are prone to forget when we are in that dark place. That all things are created by God. And if God is the Word and God is in us, then our Word is the Word of God. We create through our faith, our belief, our acceptance, and our word. And if our beliefs are simply thoughts that we continue to think, we must learn to change our thoughts. So even our problems, our troubles, our issues are of our own making. There's a big blue book that also contains that quote. For it's how we view those problems, how we name them, that creates the impact they have in our life. We have the freedom to choose what we will call it and how we will name this. Remembering the words of Joseph, who had been sold into slavery by his brothers. In Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, Joseph says, "For you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, to do as he has done this day, to save many lives." For when healing happens anywhere, it happens everywhere. And as we move through our issues of healing, we create a corresponding healing in our environment. We have the power to name it good, no matter what it looks like, and to call forward the revelation of goodness, the learning, the medicine for the people. But we must turn within to this power and presence. And we must practice our spiritual tools, because without practice, these spiritual principles mean nothing. Honesty is a grand principle to have, but if we don't have a corresponding practice of honesty, benevolence and brotherly love are grand principles, but if we do not practice sacred service, then our efforts are empty. In this teaching, we support you with learning to use the power of affirmative prayer, to recognize God, to unify with God, and to speak your word with conviction and thanksgiving so that you can know and know that you know this. And for those who may not be familiar with the science of mind, here we teach a affirmative method of prayer, which is a little different from supplication. Nothing wrong with supplication. But affirmation is a powerful way to state what we know to be true. It's a simple 5-step formula that we use in the science of mind. And the first one involves recognition, recognizing the presence of God. I remember an old timer once telling me, he said, if you can say God is, that's a conscious contact. Just saying the name of God, whatever you call God, Allah, Shiva, Yahweh, Jehovah, God is the first step. And just recognizing it. We can move through life just recognizing God. It's a prayer. It's a way of living, a way of moving and being. The second step is unification. God is, and because God is, I am. I am one with God. That's a little different from the way I grew up at St. Clair's, believing that God was up there, that God was working through Father Mario in the confession booth, but God wasn't right where I was, and that God was looking down on me, judging me. This is a different way of thinking. It's a new belief, a thought that I continue to think, that God is, I am, that I am what God is, and God is what I am. How consoling that's been for me. The third step is a realization of the qualities of God. What is God doing right now? Because whatever it is that we can think of, conceive, pray for, desire, God is already doing it. God is already in the business of being God. We don't have to ask God to please, God, do this. Would you please just do this? Make the sun come up, God. Make my life better. Because God's already doing that. All we need to do is to say yes to it, to affirm it, to change the thoughts in our head that are saying that God's not doing that God is creating lack and limitation, God is creating loss, God is creating something other than God. For if God is truly all that there can be no other. There can be no God and the fourth step is thanksgiving, gratitude. I am grateful. Jesus, the master teacher, taught this wonderfully in the story of Lazarus. Before he called Lazarus forth from the dead, he lifted his eyes and gave thanks and said, Father, I give thanks that you hear me, and I know that you hear me always. And then he went on to add some things. He said, I'm just saying this so that the people around me will catch the fire, will know your greatness. And there's a wonderful thing about gratitude. It's infectious. It's contagious. You know, on my job, people ask me, hey, Mike, how you doing? Grateful, with no complaints. And it takes them aback. They have to stop and think and take that in. Well, yeah, that's a good way to be. Grateful, with no complaints. I'm not worried about the government shutdown, not worried about anything happening on the other side of the sea. I'm grateful. I have no complaints. I accept everything that is as being in perfect and divine order, knowing that if God was small enough for me to put in my little box here, that God would not be big enough to be God. And so I let that go. And that is the fifth step of our prayer treatment, release. We let go and we let God. We plant the seed into the soil of the law, and the plant appears. And so in the foundation class, which just ended, we had a celebration Thursday night, celebrating the demonstrations that the students had received. They were all talking about how they planted certain seeds and how those seeds manifested in their life. And it took me back down memory lane, remembering my foundation class in 1999 with Reverend Charles, and how I was just absolutely amazed at the shift that was happening in my life. And many of you remind me today that that shift is continuing, and it's still going on right now. And I'm grateful for that. So in closing, right now I am affirming that when healing happens anywhere, it happens everywhere. And that the healing that's taking place in your life right now in this very moment, that it's healing 7 generations back in your family line. It's healing your descendants, both born and unborn. Creating a spiritual prototype for the healing of your family, your friends, your coworkers, no matter what the story of hurt they've experienced. So join with me in consciousness as we know the truth about our past suffering and fears. Name it nothing, trying to be something in your life. Use this science of mind and that 5-step prayer treatment to guide you in your affirmative prayers and thoughts, and the art of the heart to lead you in your sacred giving and service to this beloved community and whatever beloved community that you serve. And as Grandma used to say, stand for something so you don't fall for anything. Stand for truth. Shine your light upon the world. And let us remember that in our healing, we will attract others who too are suffering. And if we so choose, we can align ourselves with those who have chosen to call forward the light from this experience. And we must be careful because we can also attract those who are stuck in the old story. And whoever we choose to align with will be our tribe and will help us to transform the experience or to prolong it. And when, after your own healing, the time arrives for others to come to you, and they will bring you the same story of hurt that you've experienced. And you will realize that that story has now been transformed into medicine for the people. In the Native American tradition, they have the concept of the wounded healer. There's a person who has been deeply wounded by life circumstances. They've been through a great trauma, and yet they survived and they've thrived, and they come back to bring the medicine to the people. And I believe that that's who we are, because we have said yes to our spiritual awakening. We've said yes to being a movement for peace, for light upon the earth, for creating a world that works for everyone with no one left out. And like Jamie sang this morning, it's going to be all right. Everything is okay. Peace and blessings, family. Namaste.